5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Dr. Kyra Bobinet, welcome to the Make Life Rich Movement podcast. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Everyone, if you have ever struggled with failure or feeling as though you just can't quite get it together, I have a very strong inkling from my own personal awakening from reading Dr. Bobinet's book, The Unstoppable Brain, the new neuroscience that frees us from failure, eases our stress, and creates lasting change. And my goodness, it's a mouthful, but every word of it is true. And we are just very lucky today to have Dr. Bobinet come and explain everything that she has been working on. She's helped millions of people in her career as a physician, a public health leader, a healthcare executive, a behavioral expert, which I love that you call yourself a self-proclaimed behavior designer, because that makes a lot of sense now having read your book, author and innovator, and you are just passionately just leading the charge in the truth about behavior change. And I, for one, am so thankful for your work and your book, and very thankful you're coming on today to share with everyone all of your amazing information. I would love to know where behavior change first became something you were aware of in yourself. I think we all kind of find these moments within our life of growing up. You're kind of like, ooh, whoa, wait a minute there. What was that? I don't know if I quite like what I did there. I should think about that. Like, what was your first inkling of like, I should like get to the drawing board on this and figure out like why or how come?
Yeah, I think that, the good news is that if somebody has a life of struggle and suffering, it gives you enough fuel to want to figure it out. And so I grew up the latter part of my elementary years through high school in Oklahoma. And in that state, I had two really things kind of competing. One was I had a lot of family, emotional abuse, and that caused depression and insecurities and those kinds of things. And then I also had a horse, and I lived in nature. And so there was this kind of juxtaposition of navigating a very difficult human world, and then retreating to a very nurturing and nourishing natural world. And so those kind of two things were pretty much sum up my experience. But what I noticed is that very early on in my teen years, I noticed that I could not do what I aspired to do. I couldn't get myself to do my homework. I missed a lot of school because of my depression and basically acting like I was sick and missing school and all that kind of stuff. And then I also, was running behind in all of my assignments and turning in my homework. I was the queen of late homework. I was the queen of procrastination. I would sit there and just zone out in front of the TV and just remember that feeling of helplessness of like, why can't I do what I'm trying to do with school? And then that also carried over to eating because, I started to gain weight when I was 12 and, normal puberty stuff, but also emotional eating and depressive eating and that kind of stuff. So it was just really early on where I just felt out of control, and I felt like I could not operate this earth suit, this being that I was in, and it was very frustrating. And I then had a lot of self-loathing because of it. If I can't do what I'm trying to do, then I feel like, well, there must be something fundamentally really bad or wrong about me or weak about me.
Yeah. And I think your story probably resonates with so many. And of course, we're going to have different variations, but I think there's certainly something to be said as well about maybe the parental generation that you came from. And I have much older parents. My parents are both born in the 50s. I'm 39. And it was definitely, there were moments and inklings of them wanting to do something different in their parenting structure than had kind of been doled on them from parents that were just merely trying to survive. And I do remember there being a lot of conversations of my father, at least, being like, I'm going in the other room, give me a minute. Or my mother being like, no one come in this kitchen. Putting in the boundaries, reassessing what they were doing. And I always found that to be a little silly, a little sitcom-y as a child, like, oh, haha, silly mommy, so upset in the kitchen. But looking at it now, they were actively just truly trying to navigate where they were, what they were doing, and then having small children around. And it was never really a conversation they were ever a part of, but they were actively doing it. And while reading your book, I found moments where it could make me cry, but I felt very privileged to be in this current timeline where I get to read this book that helped me in 2 days. Whereas
Right.
they lived an entire parenting portion of their lives figuring it out while trying to pass on good habits to my sister and I. And along the way, this beautiful part of our brain, which you're going to talk to us all about right now, I think I found most connection in the human, let me get exactly to the phrase, because the human doing versus the human being. I connected to that immediately. I was the child that wanted to procrastinate but was too afraid to let down my parents that were already going through a lot. So I overperformed. I was a perfectionist. And being on that trail of trying to figure out, where did this come from? Like, my parents loved me. Like, I didn't need to perform for love. But I guess now it was my brain trying to protect me from all of the things that were not able to be assumed in a way that was very unhealthy for me as an adult, as an entrepreneur. It led to a complete place of burnout, and I'm now in a brand new career because what I had done before I ran it into the ground. It wasn't working for me physically.
Right,
But
right.
could you go in a little bit for us on human doings versus human beings before we discuss the Habenula? Because I think a lot of people find themselves in this place where they're afraid to be who they really are for fear of not being loved or accepted. And I think it's just so fascinating that it's so much more than that. It's so much deeper than that. And it only has to do with you and your brain.
Yeah, so this little brain that you have, that everybody has, we're awash in this society that has defined us as our performance, as what we put out. And that really, it does two things. One, it creates a lot of anxiety that we're not okay just as we are. And then the second thing is that it controls us. You know, like if I'm dancing for you, then I am lost myself. And so I'm no longer rested in this beingness. I'm no longer rested in groundedness of my intrinsic worth as a being, as a human. You know, and I'm so focused on. In your case, it's so sweet, isn't it? That your little heart, that your little young heart was wanting to protect your parents and create ease for your parents. Like, that's so beautiful, you know. And isn't it beautiful also that your parents were what's called iterating? You know, we'll get to that, but you know, trying to improve generation over generation what they received and what they gave, you know, in their parenting. And so it sounds like your family system was full of good intentions and compassion and generosity from all parties, but then this larger society was influencing both them, you know, trying to perform, you know, like be the good parent, you know, and then you as the child, like being the good angel child, so that you...
There is so much about your book that made me question. And as I said before we jumped on, excuse me, I've been on a journey the last 4 years since my father passed of really just trying to figure out who I am, who am I living for? Am I living for me? Have I been living for others? It did take my father passing for me to realize that since the moment he was diagnosed and like given 30 days to live when I was 12, I
Wow.
was only living for him. I was only living for the, how can I help my mom because she now has to go to work? And like so
Right.
many things changed so drastically. But it did at a moment in childhood where you are so susceptible to like, let's follow the rules, let's do this, this is how we do this, these are the habits, this is the routine. There's never really a conversation, I guess until now, about what is the impetus behind this. Where's the soul that's leading this journey? And your iteration and everything surrounding the inspiration inspired moments that you take to move in any direction were really where it started to make sense for me of, okay, this is how I can move forward with myself behind the wheel, rather than allowing all these other things that have been implanted and dictated. And, you know, it almost feels as though the Habenula, which I would love for you to jump into, is
Yeah.
going to give us the autonomy and permission to take back and kind of scrub clean these things that were laid upon us that were never ours, or ours to be programming ourselves with.
Right. And there's so many self-help books and self-help teachers and self-help people, you know, who are constantly applying to themselves whatever concept, you know, that's coming out of psychology. What I think is different about this is that when you marry psychology to neuroscience, you get a whole new level of confidence that you're really, really seeing things clearly. You know, that you're on the nerve, as I call it. You know, and excuse me, in the neuroscience, I didn't mean to go into neuroscience. I was just super doggedly asking this question of like, why can't I do what I want to do or what I think I should do? You know, and that led me to the brain. You know, because I guess what else is there driving, you know, behavior? But specifically this discovery. So let's shall we get into the Habenula? Okay.
Please.
So nobody be afraid of this word, because this is your new favorite word. You know, just like people know about dopamine and they know about motivation. I mean, there's things that are really easy to grok at like a population level, at a societal level, around how our bodies work. You know, microbiome. Like there's a lot of things that, you know, people know about medicine and science that they don't realize that they know. And once you have the proper instructions and the truth about how you operate as a fleshy little being, then you are, as you said, in the driver's seat. You are able to be at a new level of empowerment that you haven't before, and not because some teacher inspired you with the right words, you know, because that's more about them than about you. And so my intention is to liberate people with their own self-knowledge, because then I believe in the intrinsic intelligence and creativity of people to live from that new knowledge, and they just didn't have this information before. So the new discovery is, you know, that the Habenula, which is a teeny tiny half a centimeter, you know, there's two of them in the center of your brain, kind of like if you did this. It's right there in the middle, and it's right above a place called the thalamus. You can ignore that part, but the point being that this seems to be, and is turning out to be, in my opinion, the most powerful behavioral control ever found. And the reason why I can back that up or make that sort of, you know, very grandiose statement is that all of behavior in animals that has been studied ever is broken up into two things. One is approach, you know, I'm going to go towards this thing, and avoid, you know, approach and avoid. And of those two areas, avoid is so much stronger. It's in behavioral economics, loss economics is twice as strong as gain economics in terms of what shapes our behavior and what stops or starts our behavior. And so we have kind of found the holy grail, if you will, of when we don't do what we know we should do or we want to do, this is the area of the brain that is stopping us, because it's trying to protect us. You know, evolutionarily speaking, it's trying to protect us from, you know, it's trying to keep us alive, first of all, you know, and it's trying to stop us from harming ourselves. So, you know, example is the hot stove. If I touch the hot stove, you know, this is the part of the brain that's like, don't do it again. It's going to burn you again. You know, it's that protective, you know, hesitant, you know, that's not going to work out for you. And if we marry that with our brain's tendency to have what's called negativity bias in behavioral science, which is, you know, like, that's not going to work out for me, you know, or the one person who cuts you down versus the 100 people who love you, you know, you'll feel fixated on the one person that cuts you down. And this is that asymmetry, that distortion field of our focus, of our attention on being on the negative. And this is the area of the brain that because it's trying to keep us alive, can be quite pessimistic in the way that we see life. And we can hesitate, and we can procrastinate, and we can be stuck, and we can be afraid, and we can be pessimistic about our future. and we can be confused because we're not sure it's going to work out for us, and we just stay there. And then we feel bad about ourselves because this area of our brain also, when it lights up, it basically kills our motivation to keep trying that thing, like touching the hot stove. But if that thing is starting your own business and building your business, and you're stuck, and that brake is on, I call it, it's like a car brake, then we find ourselves unable to do the right thing for ourselves, for our health, for our lives, for our relationships, for our psychology, whatever the case may be. And so it's kind of this panacea of everything that we are struggling with, everything that we are suffering with. It is in charge of our depression. It is in charge of our anxiety. It is in charge of our addiction. It is in charge of our dopamine, our serotonin, our sleep, our hunger, our decision making. Like what else is there, right, to the human experience, besides all these things. And so, this is really, really important to know about this part of our brain so that we can start working with instead of against it. Because if you don't know this is happening, if you don't know you've got a brake pedal in your brain on your behavior, and all you think there is like, just do it, the gas pedal is dopamine, like, just do it, like, I'm going to feel good, that kind of thing, and you don't realize you've got a brake pedal, then you have half of the equation or more than half the equation where you're not working with it, and so if you only try to go or do, and then you've got the brakes on, just like in a real car, if you slam the gas pedal.
It's I almost, in reading it and kind of getting through that passage and really taking a second to be like, whoa, wait a minute. Everything that I feel down about myself, or any time that I could find an inch to be criticizing myself or judging myself or talking myself out of something, is all centered in this one, as you said, a half centimeter to bean little scenario. And reading that freed me a bit in a way that I am certainly a person. I've always been like, I'm a type A perfectionist. I'm hard on myself. I get stuff done. Like, I really graduated in 2007 right into the terrible
Economy.
time of hustle culture that we
Yeah.
all thought we were doing really great things for. And now in our 40s, we're all having cortisol issues and we can't sleep, digestive issues. But it made me realize that, we've all had that sports coach that was like, damn it, if you don't turn that elbow in, you're gonna get a shoulder injury, and like, I'm only yelling at you because I love you and I want you to
Yeah.
And then now every time you go up to throw the ball, you're like, tuck my elbow, oh my God, like it's impeding your decisions because this fear has been implanted on you where, maybe he put that fear on you because he had the same injury because he was a pitcher, and like, you can never really see where the thread that connects it all comes from. But this information that we now have about the Habenula really just makes you take a step back and wonder, where is the impetus for my decision making really coming from? What past stories that were me 10 versions of me ago are still in charge and driving this meat suit, while I'm very unhappy with the way I'm behaving, the results I'm getting, how I feel about myself. And in reading how the Habenula makes you feel, it protects you, it made me recognize it also gives me the deep pit of hatred in my stomach when I say I'm going to get up and go for a run, and the very next morning I open my peeper and it looks just the tiniest bit cloudy out, and I'm like, oh, can't run. It's not ideal. Can't do it today. And then come 2:00, I hate myself. And it's there's just, you freed me so much in my thought process of really being able to take a step back and be like, no, we're not yelling at ourselves right now. We're going to really figure out where this is coming from, because it doesn't feel like it's really me. It feels like I'm being pulled back by a babysitter that wants me to not fall face first into the fire pit. Like, where are we at here with being able to truly decipher? How do we decipher when we are steering and when we are not? When is
Yeah.
fear like driving the meat suit, and when are we making these iterations that are leading us down this beautiful brick that we're laying down ourselves?
Yeah, so let's unpack this a little bit. So basically, the habenula cycle that you're describing is that the habenula, we want it to stay in the off position. That's your goal. And it gets turned on at any sort of shred or type of failure. So failure turns it on. Perceived failure, by the way, because failure is an illusion, but we perceive that it's failing. So in this case, you failed at doing your run, getting up. Your intention was to get up and you didn't do it. So then subconsciously you are saying, oh, I failed at running today. And then your habenula went on. And then the second it turns on, it makes you feel super bad. It's like an itchy, oh, I feel not right. I feel, unsettled. I feel incapable, because it kills your motivation to keep trying that. It's saying to you, Sarah, maybe you're not a runner. Maybe you can't do this. It's the can'tness come to life. And so failure turns it on. Once it's on, the next thing it does is it kills your motivation to keep trying. Then you see yourself, your inner witness sees yourself not do the thing that you intended to do, and not knowing that the habenula turned on blames you, because who else is there, right? Just you. And so then there's this blame, and then that leads to depression, anxiety, lack of confidence, all these sort of knock-on effects. And then the more recent thinking is that, for me at least, I'm putting together that sets up for addiction. Addiction to distraction, addiction to attention, addiction to substances, addiction to anything that's going to distract me from this itchy, horrible feeling of my habenula, on. And then we chase it, right? We chase it and we continue to try to hit the dopamine, what's going to make me feel better? Is it food? Is it, watching TV? Is it, what is it that's going to make that shut up? Because subconsciously we feel all uncomfortable and we're looking for a way to comfort ourselves, not realizing that the answer is to turn off the habenula. The answer is different. It's looking at, where did I think I failed? Where did I, my expectation or my desire not meet with my expectations, and so that is a setup, and that's the subtle but critical difference in, once you know that you have a habenula and that it does this, then you can choose, you can do differently. You can look for ways to turn it off and to at all costs put out that fire of failure in your being. And people may not relate to failure, but it has cousins. It has frustration, disappointment, demoralization.
Yes. You're describing my teen and early 20s so accurately. I think the one thing in reading through the book, there were moments where, so for me, I dove really deeply into perfectionism, and actually, this is also a concept that is made up. Monkeys aren't worried about perfectionists at anything. Hamsters are not worried about being a perfectionist at stuffing their little cheeks. We do have these kind of imposed systems that we all have to exist under that do require us to be advantageous in some way. So we have food, a place to live, etc. But I did never really think about, well, we're not being hunted by saber-toothed tigers anymore, and there really isn't, for too many of us, thank God, the fear of freezing to death at night. And this fear, and rather, I would imagine the habenula's job was to protect us in all these times where all we had was survival at the forefront, and we really did need that little tap on the shoulder to be like, no, don't go in there. Remember, that's where bears live. We can't go there. Mm-hmm. But now it's almost as if we're making these bears and these oogly booglies in the night come out. Is that something that innately is just always, are we always going to look for fear, or is there truly this option to really just leave the habenula sitting in the corner until it's a matter of whoops, I almost fell off a porch here, better watch out, there's a missing step? How do we go about registering when it's working for us for good and not wanting to turn it off, rather than we're kind of just stuck in this state?
Yeah, there's so many places to go with that. Going back to the monkeys, there's clan families of monkeys, right? And there's a certain order of hierarchy of the monkeys. And so you can imagine that, the top monkey, the leader monkey, the alpha monkey, whether it's a male or female, I think in monkeys oftentimes it's a male, but it can be a female, is dominating everybody else's habenula in order to keep them not fighting with the leader. So what happens in nature is that there's competition that sets the hierarchy. A dominant male wants breeding rights, and a beta male tries to challenge him for the top position, and they squabble or whatever happens. Habenula goes on. He loses motivation to keep trying to challenge the alpha male. So let that soak in for a second. And so it is a system of control. It is the way that we are controlled by others and by society to not challenge, to not fully express what it is we have to offer. And so we're living in a society where, large systems of communication are constantly signaling to all of the other monkeys, us being, primates in our being, to stand down and to hesitate and to check in with the alpha, and to not be too big, not be too loud, not be too much, not be too strong, not be too creative, because then they'll come for your habenula. And I went to Fez years ago when my daughter was like overseas in a semester abroad thing, and she was really wanting to see a camel in real life, and so we went to this park where they had this guy who had a camel, and he would give rides or whatever. But the thing I thought was so kind of intense and also disturbing, but also metaphorically really powerful, is that this giant camel had a piercing in his nose with a little metal ring, and then a big long, strap that the handler would walk a camel around with or whatever. And just this little tiny nose ring could control this huge animal. And the animal could easily kill a person or run away or whatever the case may be. But because he was being controlled by this little nose ring, proportionate to his body, it's the same proportion. We have this little 0.5 centimeter dot in our brains. If somebody else, can control that in you, you will stand down, you will lose your power, and your power goes to them. They control you. That's how, this all works in the human family. And so there's to me a world before knowing about the habenula and a world after knowing about the habenula. Because once you know this truth, once you know about the nose ring, you can figure something out for yourself and free yourself from your past, from your coach who says, put it in. When he said put in your elbow, what I'm hearing is that your brain registered that as you're failing at the elbow. And so you complied. He controlled you, which you can agree to that control because you think it'll make you a better player, it'll protect your shoulder, whatever the case may be. But now realizing that you have a habenula, you might see it differently. You might say, oh, that was a little control piece. That controlled me, And so how do we then reclaim with choice? Like, thank you, other human, for that information. And now I'm going to apply it in my life as an iteration. So in my research, iteration is the only thing that I've found to liberate somebody's power with respect to somebody else's input or influence or attempts to control, right? Our knowledge of oh, you're trying to go for my habenula. I get what you're doing there,
Man, for you to describe the camel and the nose ring, and that we are in essence we are a society full of camels and nose rings. It was, woo! It's a mouthful right there, and I won't even get into that for fear of the algorithm really messing with this episode, but I do, I think I was so excited to speak with you and really get to the core of why this matters for the everyday Joe, because there really is we're being so flooded with really cool brand new information right now that's going to help every single one of us that can hear it and retain it the ability to truly change their life. And I think in reading your book, one of my favorite mentors in my head, his name is Ed Milet. I'm obsessed with him, and he has always championed the thought of reading your thoughts and feelings around your reality when you're not really liking what's going on, or maybe it's a project at work, whatever. And I had always had a proclivity for being able to reframe because my mother was at work. I was the oldest daughter. I had to help my dad a lot, and he was always sick. And it didn't feel right to me to go through my day sad. So I really did, whether or not it was in a healthy way, work to try and find the positive in everything. There was always a silver lining. But I guess the silver lining was the aspect of just trying to reframe what was currently going on so I could manage in the way that I needed to as a child. However, now knowing the Habenula and the power of reframing and then iterating from that reframing what you need to do to get you closer to where you want to be moving forward made me feel a little better about setting goals without there being some overarching crust punk landlord like in the middle of my brain that's like, you're going to do this today because you said you were going to do it yesterday. Well, I'm dropping that because today it doesn't make sense for me to do it. And I'm not going to chokehold myself in anxiety because 3 days ago when it made better sense for me to do the laundry today, well, the laundry's not getting done today, and I need to let go of that and move on. Could you walk us through your SMART decision-making model? Because at first I was a little nervous, like, wait a minute, I'm a to-do lister, I'm a go-getter, and now I don't really know who's telling me to make these lists and go get the things. So how, what are the ways that I can really set the tone for myself and know that I'm making an iterative decision that isn't taking me backwards and is moving me forwards in terms of my training my Habenula and how I want it to work?
Yeah, let's unpack iteration, because a lot of people, this is new to them. So an iteration is basically like you would see in software, where you have your phone has an operating system of a certain iteration. It might be on 16, 17, 18, whatever it is. But basically the developers who are improving your phone all the time are releasing new updates to the software. It could be an app, it could be your phone, to improve upon, fix bugs, all that kind of stuff. And so that is the key in human behavior to keeping going. Because in my experience and in my research, I have looked at many people, thousands of people. I used to design things for millions of people, and to a person, the only thing I've found in people who change their behavior and maintain it long term is that they iterate. And what that means in living is, in your parents' situation, instead of just screaming at you or whatever they were going to do from their parents' generation to them, they buffered that as an iteration. They're like, I'm going to close myself in the kitchen, or I'm going to go in the garage, whatever, to get away from their children in order to iterate on how they were parented. So they're improving and versioning on that. And so that's what is the key to success, is iteration. And so when you're talking about to-do lists, when you're talking about SMART goals, when you're talking about any of these tools that in our society has been touted as like, this is the way to organize your life and to get yourself to do things or whatever, morning routines, like habit routines, habit stacking, all of it, to me, those are all iterations. And the other thing to know about iterations is that they have a hidden secret expiration date where someday you will get tired of it or it will no longer serve you. So I've talked to people who were athletes, really high performing athletes. And at some point they no longer going to do their sport because they age out of their sport, and they've got to reinvent themselves, and they've got to figure out, like, what am I without the athleticism? What am I without being a professional athlete, right? And that's iteration, right? But if they don't iterate, then they can go through a very long period of time where they just feel like a failure. They just feel bad about themselves. And then they lose their motivation to reinvent themselves. And so as long as the to-do list is not being held in this perfect way, like all of this needs to be done, or I'm a failure, as long as it's not what I call a sharp, pointy object of failure, you're not holding it by the sharp end, then it's working for you. But what I want to put into question is like, that great exercise routine that you used to do, that, eating plan that you used to do, that, productivity plan and routine that you used to do, the parenting plan you used to do. Well, your kids get older, they have different needs. You get older, you learn, you're wiser, and you're not able to do that anymore, whatever the case may be. Like, realize the expiration dates, and then realize when something's fading, in your life, there's going to be a natural hypocrisy between what you say and what you do, because you're still trying to get yourself to go running, and maybe you don't really, maybe you're breaking up with running. Maybe the iteration of running as exercise is fading, and you're clinging to the past, and you're like, no, I got to force myself to run, and then more misery sets in, right? So instead of realizing that these are signals of iteration, like maybe you want to do yoga now at this point in your life, or maybe you want to swim, or whatever is calling to you, but we linger too much on, well, I got to force myself to do these things because they've always worked for me. And recognizing that things have a season. There's a seasonality to our lives where these clothes that you and I are wearing today, we're probably not going to wear these exact shirts in 20 years, right? We're going to change it up. There's going to be other things that are in style. There's, like those kinds of things, but we don't blame ourselves for clothes going out of style. We blame ourselves for the running, going out of style for us, and us not wanting to do it anymore. So what I'm asking people to do is just like, let that go. Reframe it as like, that was a great ride. That was a great iteration that lasted, a day, a week, a month, a year, a decade.
Wow. It's so simple, but it's so impactful. And while you were saying that, it made me realize, there's been a moment where you've had a girlfriend that's like, "We love me, we broke up with me," and you're like, what is meant for you will always find you, and what is meant to be will stay, and there's seasons. And in reality, that literally applies to everything, not to just the messy boyfriends that were never really your boyfriend to begin with, but the ability to let everything have its moment and then to let it slip away, and the grace you can give yourself and not having to cling on to things that might not be good for you anymore. All of this, I know that you are so steeped in science and medicine and very much like that side of the brain that is so liturgical, but everything in your book kept lending to me moments of spirituality and visualization and mindset, and the ways in which we kind of know now because of the Habenula that all of this work that you're doing on, it's giving me goosebumps. We're literally in a time and a place where we're seeing how these things work and why these things work because of how they partner with our brain. I'm literally covered in goosebumps. But there's this quote that I love so much that I was very excited to be living in a time where science and spirituality are starting to find those membranes where they connect. And there's a quote by Nassim Haramein that spirituality is nothing more than the physics that we don't have an equation for yet. And your work to me is almost like the embodiment of that quote, because there was a moment where you were discussing how there are, in essence, gaps in between your iterations, and how quickly you can continue to iterate without there being too much of a lull. And those that figure out the way to keep that flow going and get really into the rhythm of reframing, iterating, let's make good decisions, I'm not allowing this to bog me down emotionally, they're the ones that carve out that life for themselves that's been kind of created from these action-based iterations that you speak of. And then there are those that have the big gaps in between the actions. And it seems as though one is clinging to failure being the only thing they know, and one is using failure as the lesson, the tool, the stepping stone, the support to get to that next tile. Have you found in your research where that beginning spark can start for someone to feel that they identify less as a failure and more that they kind of deserve to learn rather than be stuck? Does my question make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And I would say that the metaphor that comes to me is failure of the past, or, things that didn't work out for you, we'll call it, things that frustrated you, discouraged you, whatever the case may be. That's all like scorched earth. And so iteration is all about finding the green field, like a little plot where you could plant your little seed and see it grow. And people wander in the scorched earth trying to make it work out, trying to find life. But it's really just like move on, iterate your way to a green field where you can have abundance, where you can have growth and nurturing and nourishment and productivity and all those things that you really want, health, well-being, thriving. And what you're speaking of is like, there's basically two ends of the spectrum of people. One is the people who iterate, and sometimes people iterate without even having to know why they need to iterate. They just iterate, that they don't have to unpack it. They don't have to go to therapy about it. There's certain people on that end of the spectrum that are like, all right, that didn't work out. Let me just do this. Their intervals between effort are so thin, so tiny, that they're in that flow state. They're like, okay, whatever, dust it off, keep going. That's a skill. It's not like they're born that way. They built that as a skill to survive, to progress, and they've got it right? And then the other end of the spectrum, there is this like big wallowing, like in between iterations, there's wallowing because the person doesn't know about their habenula, and so carelessly they leave it on in the on state, and carelessly they are sitting there with motivation loss, and then they blame themselves for the motivation loss because they personalize it, and they might spend years not making the next move, not making the next effort because they're so wallowing in the failure or version of failure that they like to fail. And I say we like to fail, but we don't really enjoy it. But our brain does it in order to protect ourselves, as we already established. And so on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who wallow for long periods of time. And you could imagine that if you've got two cars leaving one city to go to another city, that if one car, stops at every rest stop for long periods of time and has a meal, it's going to take them days to get to the next city. Whereas the other person, they just keep going and they have no stops, that they have very short stopping times. They might, stop and pee or whatever, but they're going to get there faster. And so that's what we see in people is that, are you a person who gets stuck in the wallows in all of the...
Yeah. I can see there being also, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and sadly a lot of those entrepreneurs are individuals that are just not happy with what they're doing, and they feel like it's not working, and there's definitely a lot of failure, a lot of misplaced perfectionism. But the thing that I always am a little saddened by, and I can't wait to send this episode to nearly every one of them, because it's almost always something that like I can't help them with, because, I can talk about email funnels, I can talk about press releases, I can talk about your product and like the packaging, but I can't make you believe in you, and I can't make you believe that you deserve to have success and that you have everything you need inside of you to just get up and give it a go and try. But, and again, as I said before we got on, like, your book changed my life in such a short period of time that I personally have had business growth in the last 3 weeks that has put me back into a state of flow that makes me feel like I've turned my habenula off in a way that I didn't realize it was on. And it has been literally the CEO of my business for the last 14 years. And the freedom of understanding that, yeah, my habenula is me. It's in this head of mine, but it's my friend now. And it's not some mysterious oogly boogly that just comes up and says, "You're terrible at this. You should just stop before you even get started." Like when Dr. Bobinet is speaking about your habenula being on, it is not some deep psychological thing you need to read 57 books about to understand. It is the little devil on your shoulder. You go ahead, give yourself another scoop of ice cream. No one's gonna know. There's no sugar counters around here. Like, it's that deep voice that the minute you hear it, you're like, this punk, what do you want? Like, go away. I'm trying really hard here. And I think the thing that you gave me from this book was that I don't need to try hard.
Yeah.
My essence can be ease. My essence can be growth. My habenula wants good for me. It wants me to be healthy. It wants me to be alive. That's why it's doing all of this. So I know now what to feed it. And I know now when to turn my back to it and say, nope, not today. You're not going to put me in a mood today. Today's not the day. We're going to be happy that I just organized all my paperwork like I said I was going to, and that's my win. And I'm going to take that. And I'm going to walk away with that. If you could give someone that finds himself pretty much at rock bottom emotionally with how they feel about themselves, really like the habenula has been there for a long time, running the show, what would be something very small? I think I heard you discuss in a previous episode a woman had a Dorito addiction. Could you tell us about that story? Because I think it could help a little bit with people being able to recognize that you are in control and it may take time. And also how long habits take. Because that was shocking and it scared me a little.
Yes, the Dorito lady, and this is from a dear friend, David Hoke, who knew this person, and she basically is an example of iteration because she had an addiction to Doritos, and her clever hack was to first of all, she'd eat the whole bag every day, and that was the behavior she wanted to stop. That was the habit she wanted to stop. And that's, we can all relate to a habit where it just keeps grabbing us and grabbing us. And so she would eat the whole bag, and she decided, I need to change my life. So she would eat the whole bag except for one chip at the bottom. And then she would leave 2 chips, and then 3 chips. And suddenly, over time, over her iterations, she got to the point where she would take just 1 chip out of the bag, lick off the flavoring, throw away the chip, and put away the bag. And so she kind of whittled her way down. But the problem is that when we hear those stories, we take it verbatim. We're like, oh, that's a great idea. Let me go lick 1 chip or whatever. But people are missing the point. It was the iteration that made her so strong. It was the iteration that found the thing, that pinpointed the thing, the flavoring on the chip. Who knew, right? But she went on a journey of discovering what worked for her. And that interest, that curiosity, that figuring outness, that seeking behavior of what is it that can help me to eat less Doritos was interesting to her brain and allowed her to find the thing that worked for then. And I guarantee you that this was years ago. I guarantee you that she needs something else now, But what stays is the iteration, and where we get really caught up is in copying other people's iterations, and that's okay. We can try them on, right? Like, oh, I like her earrings or whatever. Like, that's an iteration. We're trying that on for ourselves, but when it doesn't work for us as it worked for that person, the biggest mistake is that we blame ourselves for somehow being inadequate or being unmotivated or whatever. The main thing that everyone should know is that whenever you feel icky or whenever you don't do what you're supposed to do, that you say you're supposed to do or want to do, if you feel out of control, if you feel terrible about yourself, if you feel just like a loss of joy in life, your habenula is on, and that is the thing to cure. That is the thing to cure. And everything that ever worked for you, an inspiring book, a self-help teacher, an inspirational speaker, whatever, somebody that you're following as an influencer, every single one of those things was an iteration. Every single one of those things turned off your habenula for a while, helped you. But now you have the keys to the car. you now know that you can do it yourself. And if you feel icky and you can't figure your way out of whatever mess you're in right now, it's because you haven't found your next iteration. And so going into that seeking mode of like, what is it that's going to get me to do something here? You know, like just any little thing. I'm going on that search. And the search...
It also now makes me wonder, how do you speak of the Habenula and a child working with their Habenula? Or is that, I'm sure this is still very new and behavioral, you know, there's many layers to this, but at your core, what feels like the right way to help a child, I guess, when they're of an age that they are cognizant of making decisions?
Sarah? Hey, Riverside gave
Hi,
me
no worries.
a error that it wasn't recording anymore and forced me to refresh. So that's what caused me to leave and come back. So do you know, I just want to make sure that on your side you had what you needed and where that might have cut off.
So I think what it's doing now, it's just taking a little bit of time to upload you. So
I
when
will,
we're
yeah,
done, you may just
yeah,
need
yeah.
to
Okay,
leave
great.
the window open. And I won't keep you too much longer. I have this
Oh, we're
question
good.
and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
the one that I ask everyone, then we're all done.
You start out with this.
Okay,
That makes me
so
think about children or
I'll
something
ask
like that.
you
Was
again.
the beginning.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So what you just said makes me think about kids and how would we go about, if at all, having this conversation with them about how they can go about creating decisions with
Yeah,
their
I think
habenula
as
in
a
mind?
parent, looking at two things. One is emphasizing to your kids that life is about figuring it out. And instead of coming in and bulldozing parenting or helicopter parenting or any of that kind of stuff, like biting your nails in the background, but allowing your child to go out there and face these patterns of thinking they failed. And then the second thing is to be that voice of, you didn't fail. That's just not for you. You didn't fail. You're just figuring this out. You'll figure it out. And that was the one thing I did right as a mother, was two things I did right as a mother. One was teaching my children to be grateful, you know, because that also kind of gets you out of that victim mindset of, you know, I'm failing at life, you know, like, oh, finding the goodness, finding what you're appreciative, even if it's painful, being grateful for it because it taught you, and then figuring it out, you know, that they literally say, I'll figure it out. And I say, you'll figure it out. It's almost like a coda between us of, you know, it's time to iterate, you know, and just really embracing that. Even, you know, early childhood models like Montessori schools, for example, that's all iteration. It's a whole field it's a whole environment of iteration. Like go iteration here, like follow what you're interested in, follow what you're seeking. What do you feel attracted to? What do you want to figure out? What do you want to puzzle on? Like those kinds of things. That is learning. But then when we start putting them into a performance environment of like, this many books need to be read this week. This is the person who's read the most books. This is the person who read at least. All that kind of stuff signals to the monkeys who are not the top monkey, signals to them that there's some version of failure and makes them stand down. And so it's a disempowered state.
It reminds me of your pond frog and your ocean frog story and the comparison trap early on. I think what you stated about what you gave your children, I'm sure you gave them much more than those two things, but the ability to figure it out and to not compare along the way, but rather gather what you like about what they're doing, but not make it like your entire identity. Could you tell the pond frog story? Because it was so simple, but damn, it's profound. It truly, like, there's just so much to what you accept with your
Yeah,
happiness.
so
And what that
Pond
can
Frog
mean for you.
Story is a story about our brain's inflexibility, and inability to accept concepts that we don't understand, and therefore like stay stuck in our worldview and our world experience as a way of clinging to the past and clinging to what we know and not seeking. So we just talked about seeking being the liberator, you know, like iterating. It's the anti-iteration. So the story goes that an ocean frog hops out of the ocean and starts hopping towards a forest where he meets a pond frog whose home was this little pond. And the pond frog says, "Hey, buddy, how are you doing? And where do you come from?" And the ocean frog says, "Oh, I come from the ocean." And the pond frog's like, "The ocean? What's that?" And the ocean frog says, "Well, it's a big body of water that, you can't see the end of it." And the pond frog says, "Oh, so it's twice the size of my pond." And the ocean frog's like, "No, you could literally swim your whole day and never get to the end of it." And the pond frog says, "Oh, it's 3 times the size of my pond." And so just that limited belief, that limited understanding, and that the brain wants to always ground itself with anything new to what it already knows and what it already believes. And so getting that escape velocity, it requires us to iterate instead of perform. It requires us to neutralize our failures so that we have motivation to go out and explore the world, or to go out and do something new, or to do the brave thing, right? So that we don't get stuck in this little...
Your work is so impactful in the fact that it's just still the very, like, almost infancy of information coming out around this topic is mind-blowing to me. I can't imagine what it feels like to you to know there's just so much more to come from this. But what does it feel like for this to be the time that your career is happening in, and that you get to be a part of this groundbreaking information that is absolutely going to change the way that people exist and interact, and will ultimately just change the world in general? Like, how does it feel to be a part of something so impactful and huge?
It feels like an honor. I'm very humbled to have been led to all this information and be the first to consolidate it and translate it into applied psychology and applied behavior change. I feel like it's time. This is a moment in science, medicine, and sociology and human experience where we, kind of like the world of medicine before bacteria was very different than after bacteria. Like, after we knew about bacteria, we had antibiotics, we knew what to do, we needed to wash our hands. Like, all those things fundamentally liberated us from unnecessary death and suffering. And we're at another node in science and understanding ourselves. And again, I hope that people realize that everything that ever worked for you worked because it shut off your habenula, because you managed your habenula. So why not do it directly? Why not do it more specifically? And that's a more direct and powerful way to change your life than to try to, understand what, this inspirational speaker, that author has to say. And I also know that, in before bacteria, after bacteria medicine thinking, that there's no like famous person who's like, this is the person who everybody knows, invented bacteria. It's all of us. This information belongs to all of us. And I can be forgotten. I'm not trying to be famous. I'm just trying to carry the message to the people. You see what I'm saying? Because I have enough in my life. This is actually a job of passion for me to, hard won, liberate myself, and then offer this to...
My God, you said it. It absolutely is. And as I said several times,
Good.
you freed me from myself. I've been just couldn't put my finger on it, and now I can. And now everyone can. If you've ever felt like you're trying so hard, you know that you can do better, you know that you're smart, you know that you're capable, but something is holding you back, it is this, my friend. As she stated, it is either off and you are doing well, or it is on and you do not feel well. It is A or it is B. It is black or it is white. And if that helps you to remove a lot of the things you've heaped on yourself that are keeping you from being able to move forward, my friend, go buy this book. It will be linked in the show notes. Read it immediately. Please go over to Dr. Bobinet's Instagram and just stay up to date with what's coming, because this is just still so brand new, and you are at the forefront of it, and I can't wait to see what comes from that. And I'm just so thankful that you took this on and you've brought it to the masses. This is absolutely going to be a pinpointed time in history in the future where people are going to turn around and say, this was the year they learned how to control themselves and take literally their life in their hands and make it exactly what they wanted it. No more flailing around, letting others control you via your own body and emotions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So beautiful. And I have one final question that I ask everyone before I let you go. How do you make your life rich?
I iterate it. You know, like everything that I have as beauty around me, everything I have as love around me has been a series of a million iterations.
So beautiful. Oh, so beautiful. Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your book. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us and just help educate everyone on their new best friend, which
Thank
is
you
their
so much.
Habenula. Thank you so much.